Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, and welcome back to another Deck Tech. We're talking EDH today. I haven't done an EDH deck for a while because I've been trying to build new ones, and there's a lot that I've been building with, but I haven't really been able to find a new one that I really like as much as the other ones that I have. But I do have this card here, which I've had for a while, and I really wanted to make a really great deck with it to share with you all today. But honestly, I haven't had this I've had this card a while, but I really haven't made an effective deck with this new general here that I have in front of me for quite some time. And I guess it's just maybe one of those things where you keep brewing and nothing really gets to where you want to be. But today I thought I'd share with you a deck that I've kind of had a really bit of an indecision with building. Today's deck's general is the Mimeoplasm, as you can see here. Mimeoplasm, if you're not familiar with it, is a legendary creature, obviously ooze. It is a 0/0 for 2, a green, a blue, and a black. The card says, as the Mimeoplasm enters the battlefield, you may exile 2 creature cards from the graveyards, and if you do, it enters the battlefield as a copy of one of those cards, and with a number of additional +1/+1 counters on it equal to the power of the other creature card. The thing about Mimeoplasm is it gets really big if you have the right creatures. And another thing to keep in mind is that it's not just your graveyard, it's anybody's graveyard. You can even exile your opponent's creatures if you don't have any creatures. So this is where this card really comes in handy. But I figured since we're playing with graveyards, we play a lot of really great graveyard synergistic cards through all of Magic's history, which I will show you in a moment. But I feel like since I'm never really sure about how to build this deck correctly, I figured I'd ask all you people watching at home for a little bit of advice. Maybe I'm playing this deck the correct way, maybe I'm playing some really good cards, maybe I'm missing some things that you all are at home think, why on earth is this not in the deck? So please, I would really like your feedback on this deck. I will, like I've said, I've been trying to brew with this deck for quite some time, but it's never really, I guess you could say, really sticking to my liking, so to speak. Anywho, I'm going to do this like I normally do my other EDH deck techs, and I'm going to be going through the start of the deck with the artifacts. Starting out, we have our Soul Ring. There's no reason to really explain this. I like having Soul Rings. Soul Rings are amazing. In addition to the other ramp spells, we're running 2 signets. I have Dimir and Signet, but you can run something else. Anything that's like a mana rock usually does the trick, as long as it provides some sort of colored mana. I usually find that nifty because a lot of the creatures and spells in this deck have a lot of color requirements. Dark Steel Ingot, I kind of like to have a little ramp artifact that is there for the 3 mana curve spot. And of course, the, how can you forget, Gilded Lotus. Those ramping artifacts, those are all the ramping artifacts I run. I run a copy of Lightning Greaves. As you'll come to realize, there's kind of a theme with my version of this deck. I think I'm trying to just make Mimeoplasm as big and as hard to kill as possibly can. But sometimes I won't have a creature with like Shroud or Hexproof, so Lightning Greaves is just marvelous if I can't get there. But we have lots of ways to not only make Mimeoplasm really hard to kill, we also have it very hard to block. We have several ways to make it hard to block. Anyway, there are actually a couple artifact creatures in this deck, but we'll get into them in a second. But right now, let's start with what we want Mimeoplasm to be. We want him to be copies of creatures. He's basically a big bad clone or body double that clones things in your graveyard. But we have a lot of other creatures. Not every creature we do run is, so to speak, gigantic, but they are all pretty formidable. And if it's not gigantic, it's usually doing something that is helping us. If the creature we have isn't gigantic, it's usually getting cards in our graveyard or helping us out in some way or form. So without further ado, let's talk about our creatures. Starting off, we have the classic Innistrad card, Deranged Assistant. This is more ramp, so to speak, but at the same time, it also gets cards in our graveyard, so it basically does whatever the deck wants to do. It does both accelerate you and get you creatures for the Mimeoplasm to turn into. Helping us out also is Satyr Wayfinder, a nice reusable creature that we can, if the opportunity arises, we can bounce. We don't have any bounce effects, but other people may bounce it, so it is reusable in that regard. And we can also reanimate it, although you likely don't want to make Mimeoplasm copy of Satyr Wayfinder. Hermit Druid, the classic legacy card that was a big combo with Earthcraft back in the day. Next up is Fauna Shaman, just another classic card. Gets us creatures that we need, and we can pitch big ones to exchange for ones that we do need or are able to cast. Going to the Dredge corner, starting off with Stinkweed Imp. Stinkweed Imp is great, considering we want to mill ourselves lots of stuff. We want to get all our big bad creatures in the graveyard and just have the Mimeoplasm become those big nasty creatures. Because it's awesome, I run a Eternal Witness. It's Eternal Witness. I don't really need to explain much. We can recycle whatever we want. Now, this is a spot where I'm kind of debating on what to do. I run at the moment a copy of Trollocytic and a copy of From the Last Troll, which are essentially the same card. I feel like I could probably get rid of something and put something else in. Maybe another creature, maybe another support spell, maybe something else that gets stuff in the graveyard. Oddly enough, I run a lot of spells that I feel like I should be running in this deck, and maybe that's why I'm a little questionable about it, because I sadly don't have them. But I really feel like either one of these guys can come out. I kind of am liking... I'm liking Thrun a lot more than the Trollocytic, believe it or not, just because he's a bit stronger. Run a copy of Solemn Simulacrum just for some extra ramp. Sometimes you may just want to get that extra blocker or ramp attempt to get there, but it also is nice, gets us a card when it dies. Since I was saying earlier, we want a way for our Mimeoplasm to be unblocked. We also have Wonder in addition to the Lightning Greaves, which protects it. Wonder makes it really hard to block unless our opponent is playing a deck with a lot of flying creatures. To help us mill more stuff, we have one copy of Sidisi the Brood Tyrant. This is the first Sidisi, not the, I guess you had the Demonic Tutor Sidisi. This is really good because you will get a lot of cards in your graveyard just by playing Sidisi or by having it attack people. The problem with attacking is if you're playing a game with a lot of players, they might get a little upset at you for attacking them. Continuing with the Dredge theme, we have Golgari Grave Troll. If you are going to use this with the Mimeoplasm, you're going to probably want the Mimeoplasm to become the Grave Troll. It will get a lot of counters and even more counters with the Mimeoplasm's other part of its effect. This is another questionable one. I'm running the Vulturous Zombie. I feel like since our opponent's going to be discarding cards, we have a couple things that can mill our opponent. We have a couple things that destroy our opponent's permanents. And plus, our opponents may be just fighting with each other, so their creatures will be dying left and right. This is a nice thing to have Mimeoplasm turn into, also because it flies and it constantly gets bigger. But like I say, I feel like there are better things I could be running. Since EDH games tend to go really, really long, I'm running a copy of Consuming Aberration, just because if we're playing a game with 4 opponents, probably about each of those opponents' graveyards are going to have at least 3 cards, and this thing will be about a 9/9. This thing's also nice because it does mill our opponent, and although I'm not really a big fan of milling our opponents in EDH, I feel like this is kind of nice just because we're able to mill some more creatures into their graveyard that we may want the Mimeoplasm to become. It's Grave Titan. I mean, getting extra board presence in addition to a bigger Grave Titan is nice. Going back to the theme of hard to kill and unblockable, we have Simic Sky Swallower, which when the Mimeoplasm becomes one of these, it gets a lot more counters and is really hard to kill and really hard to block. One of my favorite black cards in this format, Rune-Scarred Demon. Diabolic Tutor on a 6/6 flying demon is always swell. One of my favorite cards for this format, Chancellor of the Spires, just gets you a nice extra value by casting an additional spell. It can be a ramp spell, it can be a tutor. There's just so many possibilities in this format, and I just liked having it around. Up next, we have a couple of the Primordials. I'm a big fan of the Primordials. Sadly, the green one is banned, but I have the blue and the black one. Blue is nice because we get so much value out of this, and the Spellcore Primordial is just a monster in this deck. If we are somehow grinded out a long game and our opponent has lots of creatures in the graveyard, your board state is going to swing monumentously. It's flipping insane, unless your opponent is not playing any creatures whatsoever. Moving on to another one of my favorites, Avenger of Zendikar. I kind of feel like this could be something else too, but still, Avenger of Zendikar is just such a powerful card, especially if you haven't played a land in the turn that you can cast it, or can cast a ramp spell the turn that you cast it. It just goes to town, gets you so many creatures, and in addition, you're also going to be getting, or have the option to have your Mimeoplasm become an Avenger. and get even bigger than it normally is right away. This is kind of more of a nostalgic factor card, but I'm running a Scion of Darkness. I do love this card a lot, but it hasn't really aged well, so to speak. But it is very powerful. It does get us some value. Can get us creatures if it deals damage. More often than not, I find like I'm usually just cycling this and then having it being exiled by the Mimeoplasm to give it 6 counters. I really feel like I could do better than Avatar of Woe. I just can't really think of what to really put in. I'm sure there's options. I just haven't taken time out of my day to research these options. But Avatar of Woe isn't bad. It has fear. It's evasive, I guess. These next 3 creatures I actually do like a lot, and I do want to kind of keep these creatures around. First things first is Woodfall Primus, a very tough card to find. Woodfall Primus is pretty ridiculous in a deck like this. You can make your Mimeoplasm become it, and it will persist, and Mimeoplasm will come back, and you'll be able to do it again or have it become another creature. Terrastodon, I mean, it's Terrastodon, there's not much to say. Destroys a whole bunch of permanents. Great, I guess you could say, politic card, as it does give your opponents stuff in return for destroying permanents. But still wonderful. There's, I think, a lot of reasons why you may want your Mimeoplasm to become a 9/9 elephant. More evasive and shroud creatures, we have Inkle of Leviathan. You can probably see my copy of this card is beat up to oblivion. But still, I love this card. Always have loved this card. I feel like this next creature, I feel like I can probably replace it with something that's a little bit harder to kill. But having this card around just makes us say that you have to kill Mimeoplasm first before anything else. And it's a Platinum Angel. I'm honestly just trying this card out. I don't think this card is particularly amazing for this deck, but it is pretty good. I think I could be running something better, but I feel like I have enough Shroud creatures. It's Jin Gitaxias, and yes, Jin Gitaxias is just a bad mamma jamma. If you can get this thing into play from your Mimeoplasm, it's going to make your opponent's life absolutely miserable. I do run Demonic Tutor. I mean, it's kind of essential. It's Demonic Tutor. You can't really go wrong with it. I'm running black. I might as well run it. More Dredge in form of Life from the Loam. I'm sure there's going to be several games where I will have to dig up some lands. Also, Dredge is nice. Getting able to use it over and over again is fantastic. Like I say, I don't run Careful Study, but I do run Frantic Search. I feel like I could be a Careful Study or something else, but I'm still testing things out, like I say. Running a set of, not a set, sorry, but I'm running a couple copies of 2 to 3 cards for 3 mana spells, Compulsive Research and Thirst for Knowledge. These are just great because they give us more cards and make us discard the creatures that we need to power the Mimeoplasm. Cultivate, it's ramp. You can't really go wrong with ramp. Oftentimes, Buried Alive is, like I say, it's tutoring for 3 creatures and just putting them in your graveyard. I mean, for a deck like this is a really, really powerful effect, so you can't really go wrong with it. Kind of running Sultai Charm for mostly the same reason I'm running Thirst for Knowledge and Compulsive Research, but sometimes you're going to want to destroy an artifact or enchantment or a creature. I'm running a copy of Increasing Savagery. Hopefully we actually milled this, because usually if you can get this to flash back, usually your Mimeoplasm is going to be, on average, it will likely be at least 20 to 21 power, and that's going to be able to one-hit KO a player, which is, well, savage, no pun intended. Factor Fiction, I mean, come on, it's extra cards and stuff in the graveyard, and for a deck like this, your opponent's probably not going to want to put stuff in your graveyard, so they're going to have to make a really, really painful choice. Or Ramp, it's Explosive Vegetation. I mean, you can't really go wrong with that. At the moment, I'm trying Siphon Mind, or like I say, I could be running one of those cards I mentioned earlier. I feel like I run a lot of card draw anyway. I run even more card draw that I haven't specified yet, but I'm trying Siphon Mind out. It's doing okay. It's not amazing. Increasing Ambition, just because, like I say, I'm going to be milling myself a lot. I'm going to be discarding cards. I can afford to flashback things and play things from my graveyard. Basically, Rest in Peace is my worst enemy. This deck cannot stand that card whatsoever. I run Beacon of Unrest. Beacon of Unrest is another classic card. It's been around since the Mirrodin block, the original Mirrodin block. But it's nice because I can bring back my artifacts that I choose to bring back. But it's also nice because I can choose to bring back my opponent's artifacts and creatures. And I can reuse it, so it will be shuffled back into my deck. And it's a really great card. I've always been a big fan of this card, and it's really fun to play it in this deck. More card draw. I'm running Pour Over the Pages. Just a nice way to get an extra card in your graveyard and a little more mana, I guess you could say, to play an extra spell maybe. Here's a card I'm kind of questionable about. I'm trying it out, and I feel like I could do something better. But it's See the Unwritten, and I feel like I'm trying this out because since I run so many huge creatures, this can really get me or my board state in a really powerful position, and it's just fantastic. More often than not, I likely will be ferocious anyway, so that's basically what the potential to get Jin Cataxius and a Runescar Demon, or you can insert any other really powerful creature combinations that you can think of here, I suppose. This card's really fun, Ever After. This card is just... it's just dumb for this deck. 6 mana for another pair of really powerful creatures is just nuts. And being able to just keep on recycling it over and over again and being able to shuffle it into your deck or put it on the bottom of your deck. And since we have so many shuffle effects, it's going to get shuffled. But it's really powerful and it's a lot of fun. More often than not, I will probably tutor for this whenever I use like a Demonic Tutor or Runescar Demon or something like that. And finally, I'm running this card. I just like to run this card because I love extra turns, and I didn't want to run Time Warp again because I run that in all my EDH decks. So I'm running Temporal Trespass, which is, I guess, a little more flavorful because we can delve away our lands and cards we don't need that we mill and get a very cheap turn out of it. Next up, we have our counter spells. I could be running more counter spells than the 3 I have here. I have Turn Aside, which is nice. I love Turn Aside in EDH, especially if you have a general that's really, really annoying and your opponents are going to want to get rid of. Turn Aside is basically a 1-mana counter for any spot removal that tries to get rid of it. I run Classic Counterspell. I mean, it's Classic Counterspell. You can't really go wrong there. But I also run a Dimir Charm just because I mainly use Dimir Charm just to kind of stack my deck and put some cards in my graveyard that I want the Mimeoplasm to become. But other than that, it usually counters a board wipe or kills a very weak creature, mainly like a Birds of Paradise or something like that. But it's a nice card. I've always been a fan of Dimir Charm, and I think it works well. It has a home in this deck. Moving on to enchantments, I really feel like I could run something better than this, but I just like to run it. It's kind of cute, but I'm running the Moldervine Cloak, another dredge card that no one plays in actual dredge decks, but I think it's nice just because it gives the Mimeoplasm a little extra boost. And even though it's an aura, you can recycle it by using dredge, so I think it's kind of nice. Surprisingly, this next card is actually a lot more powerful than it looks. It looks kind of weak on paper, but Sultai Ascendancy is kind of a monster in this deck, just because if we see 2 creatures on the top that we don't want to draw and want the Mimeoplasm to become, we can just mill them. It's also nice because if we don't see a card we want on the top, we can mill those cards and hopefully we'll draw it instead, but it's nice because we're basically fixing our draws and filling up our graveyard, which is basically what this deck wants to do in the first place. Another thing to help us out with that is Monastery Siege. More often I'm choosing the Cons effect, which gives me an extra card. I do have to discard a card though, but even though I do complain about cards being discarded a lot in some decks, this deck wants to do that. That's why I'm saying Rest in Peace is our worst enemy. And lastly, I'm running this thing. I think this is more of a late game thing. I normally don't really feel like I end up playing this just because I feel like I have a really big board state already or a really big Mimeoplasm already. But I'm running a Dreadbridge Chant. I feel like it's more for shock value than anything. I really haven't come into a game where this has really been life-saving. I just think it's a win more card. I feel like I probably could play something else, but it's a Dreadbridge Chant. It's a lot of fun. It gets you a lot of value, and since we just have so many big creatures in our graveyard, I mean, hot dog. Now, I would highly recommend, if you have it, to run a copy of Liliana the Veil, simply because you can cause everyone to discard their hands. They likely won't discard creature cards, because you know what your general does. But you can discard your creature cards that you aren't going to cast and make the Mimeoplasm instead. Also, having these other 2 nifty effects are really nice. But I know that not everyone wants to spend $100 on one card. So if you don't want to do that, you can run another copy of Liliana. I'm actually trying out Liliana Vest, the classic tutor card, which also can make you discard your cards if you want. And finally, the last part of the deck I'd like to talk about. And finally, the last part of this deck I'd like to talk about are the lands. The lands, I'm sorry, I didn't take the time to organize them, but they're in no particular order. Running my cheap fetches. Temples. I feel like temples are nice. I'm running the Greerreach Sanitarium, just so I can discard more cards. Ghost Quarter, because I want to get rid of a land. I could run my Strip Mine too. That's another good option to have. One land I'm not running at the moment, in this deck at least, because I only have one, and it's in another one of my commander decks, is Ancient Tomb. Ancient Tomb's actually really good in this deck. There's Opulent Palace, my Tri-Land, Foul Orchard, Drowned Catacomb, Yavimaya Coast. You see some basics. Running my Fetid Pools, a Drowned Temple, which is a nice land I can ramp into in case I mill it. Command Tower, Table of Deceit, Reflecting Pool, Overgrown Tomb, Temple of the False God. Like I say, I should probably also be running a Thespian stage, and another land I could run. I'm having trouble finding them are the Karu lands, just because I have some ways to untap my my permanents. I'm running a Reliquary Tower to work in synergy with Jank Ataxius, because even though your opponent's hand size is going to be crippled to 0, you're not going to have a boost in your hand size when you have him in play. So that's what Reliquary Tower is for. And that was my deck tech for the Mimeoplasm. The Mimeoplasm is a really fun general to play, especially if you like cloning things in your graveyard, or just having a really big, hard-to-kill creature that loves to attack. Like I say, it's not too hard to get this guy to be like a 10-10, or between like a 10 and 10, or a 15 power creature. But still, it's the thing about this deck is you have to be kind of careful, because once everyone at the table sees that you have this giant thing that will kill them all, they're likely going to go after you. So I highly recommend you use something like Ever After, Avenger of Zendikar, something like that to get the board state. Sepulchral Primordial is also really good in that regard. But yeah, it's just, you want to have your opponents have a full graveyard so you can use their creatures instead. More often than not, you likely will have the most powerful creatures in your graveyard, so you're probably going to at least want to clone one of your creatures and have the Mimeoplasm become it.